And at our number 5 spot, we have The Oracle, which is a mostly good album. Now, The Oracle is the first Godsmack album I ever listened to. I actually remember this album coming out when I was 15. I didn't pay it too much mind because at the time I was still obsessed with Korn. But even so, I remember it as a distinct part of my adolescence, a notable record, if for no other reason because of how huge the singles off this album were when it came out. From an outsider perspective, this Godsmack record captures my attention more than really any other Godsmack album as well. And the first reason is because of its production. So Godsmack worked with two of my favorite producers for this record. The first is John Kirschweg for the song Whiskey Hangover, which is one of Godsmack's best songs ever, definitely one of their best radio singles, and one of the best things they've ever done as a band. John Kirschweg, as you know, is the producer for Creed. He produced all those Creed records I love, Scott Stapp's solo album, and the Only Puddle of Mud record that I genuinely think is great. So he's a pretty talented guy, and I would say he's able to bring out those talents in Godsmack as well. His production really does add something to Whiskey Hangover, being as he was able to yield one of the band's most successful songs of all time, which makes me wonder why they didn't choose to produce the rest of the record with him. It just seems random that they'd have such a strong hit with John Kirschweg overseeing it, and then they'd never follow through with it. It's just something that was basically a one-off song. And I'm wondering if this decision had anything to do with Godsmack leaving it off the final version of the album, being as Whiskey Hangover isn't even on The Oracle, it's just a bonus track. The second thing I liked about the production is it features Dave Fortman, who, as you know, produced one of my other favorite albums of all time. He's worked with Mudvayne. He produced 3 Mudvayne records that I really love. He produced All Hope Is Gone, which is my favorite Slipknot album. Yes, We Exist. And he was heavily involved on work with another album I really love. I'm not going to say the name of that album, being as I've already talked about this band, enough in this video. And this is Godsmack's video, we're not trying to take away attention from Godsmack. I just wanted to briefly bring that up, that he was involved in this other album as well, too. And I gotta say, Dave Fortman's production adds a lot to Godsmack. He brings in a rejuvenated energy on The Oracle that was lacking on 4. I couldn't really get a lot of songwriting credits for this album, but it does feel like these guys are playing more to each other's strengths than they did on 4. And the production he brings out of these guys really does feel more like a band, as opposed to just Sully Erna presenting ideas, or the guys making their own music and Sully Erna just singing on top of it later. Additionally, this album has a lot of the things I love about Faceless, but it does feel more collaborative. It feels like they're more like Tony Rambola, Shannon Larkin, and Robbie Merrill are more involved in the final say of these songs. Even if Sully Erna does oversee the final say, it does feel like they have more input this time around. Some of the best aspects of this album are the longer songs Godsmack has made. What If and Love, Hate, Sex, Pain are 2 of the best Godsmack songs ever. And it really shows how talented these guys are when they do make that leap, when they do make that step forward and try to be more interesting creatively, instead of just writing songs made for rock radio. The title track, The Oracle, is very good as well. It's also one of the longer songs on the album, and it closes out the record. It's an instrumental, and I would say this song is basically vampires, but vampires succeeding at what it tried to do. It's one of the best songs I've ever heard by Godsmack, and it's very interesting. It forces me to give them a lot of props, as these guys just play off each other so well on this song without a single lyric being uttered. I would say Love, Hate, Sex, Pain is the most fun I've had listening to Godsmack thus far. Lyrically and musically, it's probably their most interesting song ever. And it's a great single. It's not hard to see why it did as well as it did, because the song at its core is just very good. And people resonate with that. When you push yourself, or when you try to make something that took a lot of work out of you, that required a lot of attention, care put into it, people respond to it and they'll give you props for it. As did I. I enjoyed this album, and I'm a very harsh critic of Godsmack. Well, I mostly enjoyed this album, but I love this song. On 4, I brought up how some of the songs, notably One Rainy Day and Living in Sin, felt like the 4 Godsmack guys in a room and just kind of jamming out ideas together. I would say What If and Love, Hate, Sex, Pain and The Oracle feel like these guys in a room, and they're throwing ideas out together, but they're actually improving upon them. They're making them interesting. They're making them captivating. And they're really clicking as a band. Even on the more radio-friendly songs, Godsmack succeeds at this. Saints and Sinners is cool. It's a fun, good Godsmack song. Very standard, paint by numbers with what we've come to expect by them. And Forever Shamed is nice also. I really think it has a good groove to it. Unfortunately though, outside of these songs, The Oracle doesn't really maintain the same consistency as Faceless. And again, I would say it's not as bad as Awake or Self-Titled, but there's definitely a dip in quality on some songs. Devil's Swing is an interesting track. It features a harmonica solo and it shows off Godsmack's blues' influences. But outside of the fact that it's interesting for its instrumentation, I can't really say it adds anything else to the album experience that I didn't really care for before. Crying Like a Bitch is probably the most offending example. It was the diss song Sully Erna wrote towards Nikki Sixx after their feud, and I gotta say this is a really stupid song. It basically plays to the stereotype people have of Godsmack. It's just another example of Godsmack being a rock band for douchebags. Like, it doesn't really change anything to affect that stereotype or to undo that stereotype. The music video for this song is even more obnoxious. While musically, at no point when I say the album really has a dip in quality, the songwriting does fluctuate. I would actually say 50% of the songwriting on this album is very good, and the other 50% is very standard or just what you'd come to expect from classic Godsmack. Good Day to Die is actually one of my favorite songs musically speaking, but it's ruined by Sully Erna's just weird vocal melody. And Shadow of a Soul is another very frustrating song because I feel like this song could go somewhere interesting and it just doesn't. It just carries on to such a way that I was actually bored. I was annoyed with this song and just waiting for it to end. I think one of the biggest mistakes this album made is it left off some very good B-sides. I Blame You could have easily been swapped for some of the lesser songs on the album, and I really think Whiskey Hangover should have been included. I think The Oracle should have been the second to last song on the album, and Whiskey Hangover should have been included as the last song. Shadow of a Soul really has no business being on this record, and it's definitely one of the worst Godsmack songs I've ever heard. The Oracle is a very good album, primarily thanks to Dave Fortman's talents as a producer, as well as these guys' talents as musicians, but the songwriting isn't on the level of Faceless. I would say those elements are there to show a significant growth from Faceless, or maybe even to combine the best aspects of Four and Faceless into one record, as What If, Love, Hate, Sex, Pain, and the title track are musically interesting songs, showing Godsmack growing as musicians. But regardless, this record doesn't really take a leap forward. I would say it's better, especially compared to what we've heard from Awake and Self-Titled. I'd say it's higher on this list when I do my final ranking, but ultimately I still think it's just a very lukewarm record, and it could best be described as okay, and just slightly better than Four.